Welcome all to this week's cold and blustery March 22nd edition of Conscious Aging. I'm Mark Davenport here with
Heidi Hörnlein, as usual.
From at least sunny Paradiso Integrale in Umbria, Italy. We're pleased to present today Jane Duncan Rogers in a conversation with us entitled, as unlikely as it may seem, Aging, the Secret Behind the Greatest Opportunity You Have Ever Had. So, why unlikely? First, a moment as our guest says hi and appears on the screen so they can see you. Jane, say hi.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and it's a wonderful topic to be talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
It is. And before we start into it, we want to tell to the people that if, in case they watch on YouTube live now, we won't monitor the comments there, but we will monitor the comments on the wisdomfactory.net/Jane-Duncan-Rogers. Okay, that's one thing. And as Mark said, this is a series. Actually, it's season 4 of the series, which is called Conscious Aging. And this season 4, the program page you can find at bit.ly/conscious aging, which is bit.ly/conscious with a big C and aging with a big A and an E after the D, aging. While you can register for the still upcoming episodes and for the next one, because we will do new seasons at this address here, bit.ly/conscious aging with all small letters. I think that's...
Sounds like we're never going to stop.
No. We begin now, don't we?
All right. Maybe we could get this one going. Okay. And now finally, just a few words about our guest. She has learned many things in her life and has followed several paths on her way. I'm reading.
Yeah, go ahead.
To where she is today. And the path that showed her the greatest opportunity of all is, yes, death. Her experience of which she'll be talking with us about today. And with that rather abrupt introduction, we turn the mic over to her for her story about that greatest opportunity and anything else you'd like to tell our viewers about you as we begin today.
Yeah, and especially we will talk about that later, what she is doing now.
Absolutely.
Because she is giving a great service to people who are in difficult situations.
Yes, she is.
Okay, start. What?
Go.
Thank you. That's a very warm welcome, and I'm very pleased to be able to be here. Yes, that subject, sometimes people call it the D word, death. It's not one that we like to use, generally speaking. And, up until my husband died, which was in 2011, and in fact, up until he was diagnosed with stomach cancer, which was a year earlier in the autumn of 2010, I hadn't particularly thought about it. I'd been interested in it as a concept. I had studied it professionally in my work as a counsellor and therapist, but it hadn't touched my life in a big way. So when Philip was diagnosed with this disease, it was like, right, okay, it stops you in your tracks. And we were stopped. He made many, many changes in the way that he was living his life, and I was supporting that. But to be honest, we were told at the time by the doctors that the prognosis was quite good if he would have chemo and then an operation and then more chemo. If they managed to get all the cancer out in the operation, then he could look forward to another 20 years or so. But that's not what happened. They didn't get all the cancer out, and so 6 months on from that first diagnosis, we really were facing the fact that he was going to be dying sooner than later. Now, one of the things that we realized during that time is that you are alive right up until the moment that you are dead. I know it sounds really obvious, but it really is true. And I watched that happen because, you know, Philip was getting thinner and thinner, and there was a lot of stories about it. And I've written about this in my book, Gifted by Grief, a true story of cancer, loss and rebirth. In fact, here it is.
Yeah, and I want to tell the people, this is all, you can all find it on her page, on her event page, thewisdomfactory.net, Jane Duncan Rogers, with all the hyphens in between. There's all the information and the books and her TED Talk.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of things that I've been doing, but I tell you, at this stage, 6 years ago, this was not happening. I wrote the book about maybe 2.5 years after Philip actually died. But if I think about, because people have asked me, well, gifted by grief, can you really be gifted by grief? And in the first gift that happened, I think, was in that last year, because we had, I would say, out of the 20 years of us being married, that was probably the most close, the most intimate, and the most loving that we were able to do. And I know that people do talk about that. It's because when you come close to death, you suddenly really appreciate what life is. So it came to the point where even he was spent the last 6 weeks of his life in hospital. We didn't know that was going to happen. It never occurred to us that when he went to hospital that he wouldn't come out again. But during that 6 weeks, there was a moment where I said to him, I love you, like you do. We were saying it a lot to each other. But in that moment, it didn't actually feel true, because when I was saying, I love you, it felt like there was an I here and there was a you there sitting in a little bed. And actually, the truth of the matter was that love was present in and through and around us and everywhere. And he knew immediately what I meant, because somehow that statement in that moment was, funnily enough, a statement of separation between us, and it didn't feel like there was any separation. So I know this is a bit of a strange idea maybe, but to us it was just pure beauty in that moment. And that was one of the gifts, I would say, that happened for me, for us, before he died. And then afterwards there were a lot more. I've talked about them in the book. It's a very personal book where I share excerpts from Philip's blog at the time and my journal at the time. But anyway, it was the reaction to one of the chapters in that book that has led me directly to what I'm doing now. Because one of the chapters was where I talked about the questions that I had asked Philip before he died. And they were really practical things like, what kind of coffin do you want? How do you want your body to be dressed? Do you have any precious things that you would like to go to particular people that I can make happen afterwards? Now, he didn't want to answer these questions, neither did I, frankly, but we had received an email from a friend who said, you've got to get these questions answered. And after the third email along the same lines, I got Philip pinned him down in the bed with the laptop and asked him the questions, and he gave me his answers. And again, it turned out to be the most loving thing that we could do. It was really amazing that weekend. It was almost like we were doing a last project together, and we'd been really good at doing projects. So something that we had been dreading and that I know a lot of people dread actually turned out to be a really magical time for us. Anyway,
I would like to say that you are showing to have a big maturity to be able, both of you, to handle a situation like that, and to be able to be in the moment, in the situation, the reality with what is, instead of fantasizing, I don't know what. So this, I think, has enabled you and would enable everybody to see the gift in these situations, you know?
Yes, and you know, it is much more difficult to answer these questions when you actually are in a position where you know you are going to be dying sooner than later. So most of the people that I'm working with now are not in that place themselves. They probably know somebody who has been. so it's a lot easier to prepare for end of life, which is the work that I do now, when you don't actually have to do it, if you see what I mean. Anyway, it was because I had about, I don't know, a lot of people in the space of 2 weeks saying the same thing to me. I've read this chapter, I need to answer these questions too. And basically that started me off on, I put together what is the Before I Go workbook, which is available on my site, beforeigosolutions.com. And that contains all the questions. There's a whole lot more of them now, because as I researched, it became clear that there's more and more that needs to be taken care of before you come to the end of life, if you want to have the most peaceful kind of transition that you can have, and enable your family to have the easiest administrative time of that they can have afterwards. I'm not saying that that necessarily alleviates the pain of the grief, but, you know, on top of the pain and grief, you do not need to be trying to do things like finding out if there was a will, discovering how the household works because your partner did it all, then, you know, they did it all. You don't need to be wondering what they wanted for a funeral, or what on earth you're going to do about their digital life.
So what I would like to ask you, why do you think that people hesitate to do that? And also, I know all that, and we have here Gina Donaldson in the audience, and she does sort of a similar thing, and we heard her lesson, and she said, do everything. And you know, when I did finally my will, because I had to go to the hospital for a little thing, but I thought, now is the moment. Now finally I do it. So the question is, I know it, we know it, and still we don't do it. How can you help, or do you help people to overcome this? And first of all, what is it that we have this?
Yeah, it is true. This never gets to the top of our list of priorities. And it was only when Philip was diagnosed that we both thought we need to make a will, which we did. And that actually is the one thing that people will probably do, because that's the thing that they know about doing. Yes, I think that it's a deep fear of maybe a superstitious based fear that if we think about this, it will make it happen sooner. And even though we know that maybe, even if we first of all understand that that's the reason, that and we know rationally that that's not very sensible, it doesn't matter. It still gets in the way. It's because it's so easy to ironically be here now, living in the moment, doing your whatever it is, and we're always all busy, you know, it doesn't matter what you're doing, especially if you're retired. I have discovered, not that I'm retired, but I talk to quite a lot of people who are retired, and they are busier than they've ever been.
Yes, I agree.
And there's no room to do something like this, but it's a bit like making the time to do something like something that you know is good for you, that you the example that's coming to mind is brushing your teeth. Now, from a young age, we are encouraged to do that, and we get into the habit of doing it. If we were able to be more comfortable talking about dying and death and grief, just as a normal part of conversation, then perhaps preparing for end of life would become normal as well. And that's really what my mission is to have end of life plans that become as commonplace as birth plans are. But we can't do that if we have, if you like, pushed death away into the cupboard. We can't, we have to have it as part of life.
You know, I've had a similar experience as you have. 4 years ago, my 32-year-old daughter died of breast cancer. Oh. And that was a devastating time, of course. I've had other relatives die, but nothing with the impact of her.
No, of course not.
But I can speak also that there was a gift in that because I got more familiar with death than I ever had. I listened to people, I read books, I watched all kinds of things by philosophers on YouTube, etc. And I really came to accept it in a way that wasn't so simply personal.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a really I don't fear death now, not like I did before. Perhaps I'd never looked at death well enough to not be afraid of it, but that was an effect. So I kind of interrupted your flow there, but I had to say that. Yeah.
Of course you did. Of course you did. I'm so sorry to hear about that. And yet, that's the irony, that in something that appears to be so devastating and is devastating, that actually there can be enormous gifts. But I think that one of the reasons that we don't put this at the top of our list is because we don't realize that. We put death and anything there's an awkwardness about it, and we put it to one side as if it were not part of life.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the culture. No, we are living in this culture where death is sort of an accident which shouldn't happen.
Exactly.
Instead of including it as it was once a time ago, it was just part of life. And we have this idea that we can fight against death, or
well,
it's so strange. And so we think everybody dies, but I don't.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly. Not my death. No.
Exactly. And so therefore, planning anything for end of life, you have to confront that, because you can see that it happens for everybody else. But the fact that it might happen to me, I mean, that was one of the effects for me of Philip dying was, oh my goodness, this could happen to me too. And it could happen any moment. That was very important, because I then started to filter everything that I was doing through this sentence, which was, am I enjoying myself? I still do it now, because the thought of me dying suddenly, say, at a moment when I might not be enjoying myself, was just too awful to bear. So I really encourage people to do that. It's dead simple. Dead simple. Oops, that was not meant to be a pun.
Yeah, but I want to come back to the gift of dying. I watched my mother dying in the moment, and I accompanied other two people in the last days and weeks, but I was not there at the moment. But I found it so enriching, so beautiful, especially when my mother died and my sister on one side, me on the other side, and we were singing to her. And it was like a sacred atmosphere. And I'm really, really, really grateful. When my father died about 30 years or 40 years ago, I was not ready for that. I couldn't do that. I was not there. But now with my mother, and I would wish everybody to be able to accompany a person before they die and get into this deep contact with life, not necessarily with a person, but with life.
Yeah, and that's a very useful way that you've distinguished it there, that you get in contact with life, not necessarily with the person, because that was another thing that was major for me with Philip. I watched him die, and I'd never been with a dying person before. I'd seen a dead body, but not actually been at the moment of death. And that's why I say that life is still there right up until that moment. Somebody is still living, because I watched you don't know when the last breath is going to be. So the breath happens, and then it happened again and again, and then there were no more breaths, and there was a slight change of color in his face. And I asked my friend, who was also there, if he had died. She was a nurse, so I knew that she would know. And she said yes. And I saw within a few moments, maybe a couple of minutes, that the man whom I had known, the body was lying there. He appeared to be lying there, but who he was not there. It was quite uncanny. Now, I knew about this intellectually. I'd read about it, I'd learned about it, but to experience it was something quite different. And I had been talking to him and singing a little bit, like you were saying, Heidi, and I had to stop looking at his face, and I had to turn and look up and continue talking to the ceiling, because I didn't know where else to look, but I couldn't address this thing that looked like Philip but wasn't Philip any longer. And that was so strong that about 3 weeks later, I think, I woke up one morning and I thought, that was an empty bag lying on the bed. So this is a filled bag, and what is it filled with? And that sent me off on a mission. And that mission, to discover what that was, and remember, I knew about this intellectually. I'd read about it. I believed that we are not our body, we are not our emotions, we are not our mind, but I hadn't had an experience of it. And within that first year after Philip died, that was the greatest gift, actually, is that I understood the difference between what you were saying there, the person, the personality, and life itself.
Yeah.
Now, I often forget it, but I do know that I am, you are, life itself.
But I wanted also to tell you, as an experience I had in the weeks before my mother died, I was there as a caregiver. Oh, now I hear an echo.
Yeah.
Okay. And I slept in the room nearby with the open door, and I heard every breath, and the time seemed to be disappearing. It was like a huge, long meditation, which afterwards it was only 2 or 3 weeks, but for me it seemed like years or something. Also, this alone was such an experience, to be connected with, I still would say life and not the other person, because my mother was not there anymore so much with the head before she died. But this as an experience was, I really would encourage everybody to find ways to get familiar with death. For me, it was a great gift, and I so resonate with your title.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I think, you know, I wrote about this in the book as well, and now the work that I do, which is helping people prepare end-of-life plans, it's actually incredibly practical. But it's a lot easier to do it when you realize that who you really are is not just a body. We need to do these end-of-life plans because there is going to be a body left over. And if you don't take care of it, then everybody else is going to have to do it. And that can be very difficult at a time when they are grieving the fact that you've passed on. So that's why I'm so passionate about doing this work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And what I find the very best thing of all of that, and that's also a reason why we do this series with conscious aging, is to reintegrate older age or getting older and death into life. Because as we live now, like ignoring everything, it's not a healthy way of living.
Yeah.
No, that's right. And you know, I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking this: we need, as a society at the moment, I think we need to become more at ease with transitions. And approaching the end of life is a transition, of course. The actual moment of death is a transition. There's lots of stuff out there about transition, but one of the things that I know about making a transition is that it's important not to make any decisions that are going to bind you to the end result for a long time. So people will say that when you're grieving, you know, you hear that, don't make decisions in the first year or something like that. That's not terribly useful, I don't think, because, for example, we had been renting a house, and I was given notice 2 months after Philip died. It was the last thing I wanted to do was to move house. But I had to. That's a fairly big thing to happen. About transitions. The other thing that I think is really important is to be tender with yourself, really tender and kind and loving. And that actually is another benefit. Well, it's a benefit in my world anyway, to aging. I've become much more kind and much more tender and much more self-loving in these last few years, having been on this journey of understanding self-love for years and years and years. And yet it came to a deeper level as a result of embracing death through Philip's death into my life. Yeah.
I could add here that for how long now? 4 years we've been doing a page in Facebook that we call Masterminding Integral Aging, and it began rather as a kind of political screed almost, because I just woke up to realize how older people were treated so badly, and I was one of those older people. Damn it, yeah. And it has grown since then, so it's not nearly so political. But what we've come to understand is that there are all kinds of ways to get old.
That's right.
Yeah, there was a gerontologist who was quoted as saying, "When you've seen one 80-year-old, then you've seen one 80-year-old." That we become much more divergent as we get older, which is partly a result of a kind of freedom that we come to experience.
Yeah.
And I that's for the person who's getting older, but of course that would include you too.
Yeah.
And it's really wonderful to see how the field of inquiry has grown.
Yeah.
2 years ago, we made a presentation on this topic at a convention we go to, and it's coming up again in May, and there's 4 or 5 people.
2 years ago, we were the only ones talking about aging or even death, and now near-death experience expert Moody, I think he's called.
Ray Moody.
Ray Moody, he will be part of the conference, and many others talk about that. So it seems to come slowly into existence. But before we go ahead, I know there are quite a few viewers, and I invite you to write your comments, ask your questions. This is the moment where you can ask Jane what you want to ask her without scheduling a session. So don't be shy. TheWisdomFactory.net, Jane-Duncan-Rogers. And there is the comment stream. And please write. Oh, you can also go to the website, thewisdomfactory.net, and there is in the menu bar live streaming, and you should be transported directly there. Yeah. And do take this opportunity. It's rare.
Yes, it's not so often that I'm doing live things, that's true. But you're right, this topic is becoming more and more talked about in the media. More and more people are doing things to make it, to bring it to our attention, really. And I think one of the reasons is because as the baby boom generation gets older itself, first of all, we're having to deal with our own parents' death in very many cases, or their aging. And it's difficult to do that without reflecting on the fact that here I am. Yes, I'm aging too. So I'm 60. The other day I thought, gosh, it's only 15 years until I'm 75. And then that's the age that my granny died. I better get a move on. I expect that I will die at that particular point. I don't know. So why it's so important to do things that you love. Keep filtering them through. Am I enjoying myself? And also another thing that I think I've realized, which is really important, is, I know this sounds paradoxical, but to go slowly. It's very, very easy these days to recognize I'm trying to get things done. I want to get this out there. I feel very passionate about what I'm doing. If I'm going at a very fast pace, and I'm very well tuned to recognize this now, although it appears, my mind says you must go even faster because then you'll get it all done. Actually, my heart says the opposite. You have to slow down, because out of that place of slowness, which brings connection, there's the space for miracles. And when there's space for miracles, it's amazing how many things get done or get taken care of or whatever. So that would be another of my wee messages at the moment.
That's pure wisdom what you're saying.
Yes,
I think. I think that weaves into it was Gina asks you. She says, Jane, how do you attract people to have these discussions? Do you do this in public or one-on-one? Which works best?
Okay, well, I mostly I'm offering groups, because the groups, what I found with people who want to do end of life plans, who want to take care of the matters that need to be taken care of before you die, it really helps to do it in groups. I do work with people one-to-one, not a problem at all if people want that, but the groups allow you to talk and tell your stories and hear other people's stories. And that's incredibly valuable, because when we're talking about a subject that you probably would not probably bring up at the dinner table, when you're given permission and a context, a safe context within which to have these conversations, it's amazing how much people want to talk and how much relief there is in talking. So I work with people in both ways. The next group program will be coming up. It's an online program. It will be coming up in May. You just need to go to my website, beforeigosolutions.com, to find out more about it. What else? Or you can email me, jane@beforeigosolutions.com, anytime with any, or join my Facebook group as well. I have a Before I Go End of Life Conversations Facebook group.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. And I want to pick up what you said, that you wouldn't talk about this on the dinner table. We have the experience when we could still monetize our videos on YouTube, because now when you have not enough subscribers, you can't monetize it anymore. By the way, who is listening, please subscribe to our channel. Anyway, I noticed, and there was something like death or end or something. They excluded us from monetization, because it's not fit for most advertisers.
Yeah.
And even when we talked about couples with Dr. Tom Habib, about the couples lines of development, this sounds like sex, although it's not, but it's not. It's so strange what people want to exclude of their lives. I mean,
yeah, it's a good point, that, because one of my visions is that people sitting around the dinner table will be able to easily talk about this, just like they would talk about anything else. Now, that may or may not happen in my lifetime, but if I've contributed towards that happening, like, I come from a family where it has been relatively easy to talk about this, probably not on a special occasion. You might not use Christmas dinner to do that, but depending on the context. So, for example, I often get asked, how do you start a conversation about this sort of thing? Like, people maybe want to say something, but they're nervous because you don't know how the other person is going to react. Well, what I say is, one of the most easy ways to do it is think of somebody in the media who has died, or a celebrity of some kind, or a local person who has died, and you can use that. You can simply say, for example, I read in the paper today that somebody locally here had he was the owner of quite a big business in the Highlands. He had been killed when a tree fell on him. Now, that's not a usual way of dying, but it did happen. This would be a perfect thing that you can say to somebody, oh my goodness, did you read that article about so-and-so dying? It made me think about, and then you say whatever it is that you want to say, and then you can ask that person what they think about it. It might be, it made me think about what I wanted for my funeral, or what would happen to my family if that suddenly happened to me. Do you see what I mean? So you place it in a context, and then it feels natural. And then the seed has been planted for further conversations as well.
So what you say, that we need to develop the skills.
We do. And we also need to develop the skills of listening when people are wanting to tell their stories about end of life or birth. It can include birth as well. Because once people get permission to tell a story, or feel safe enough to do so. They want to be told. They just want to be told. And to be able to listen without judgment, really important. Really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Here is Ray Carr, who has been a guest in the previous season of our show. And he says it's ironic that death has such a valuable lesson. You don't get to do it more than once.
Yes, that's true. Oh my goodness. Maybe just the fact of knowing that points us in the direction while we are alive to contribute and engage with life as much as we possibly can. So, for example, this morning, I like to go out for early morning walks, and particularly very early, so that there's nobody else around. And this morning, I was aware of the trees and the birds singing and the sun rising, and I was fully aware and engaged with that happening. And then a moment later, I was busy in a thought and didn't even notice it. And I encourage people to do the best they can to be in the moment. Just like all the great spiritual masters say, be here now, because that's where we really engage with life.
Absolutely. And I think, if I understand it right, Ray, you also mean that the experience of death is a valuable experience and it's nothing to flee. I imagine for me, I want to be there when I die. I want to get to know how it feels like, you know. And
that would be great, wouldn't it? And because that's another thing, even though lots of people have had near-death experiences and can come and tell us how it's going to be, actually, we don't know how it's going to be for us. It might be different. So that means that we're dealing with uncertainty and the unknown. And, the mind does not like that. The mind does not like that at all. And part of the irony, perhaps, about doing an end-of-life plan is that it helps to keep the mind calm about what might happen at the end of life. That's one of the things, because there's a lot of things that you have to look at if you are going to put all the right things in place. And yes, we know that plans quite often don't turn out the way that we want them to, but it serves a purpose in life if it gives us relief, if it gives us peace of mind, if we know that our family are going to be able to carry out our instructions about the various areas of our life after we have gone. And that in itself, I think, is really valuable.
I think it is very important, and that will finally also lead me to set the things up. It's important not to load the other person with having to figure out and having to decide, and
you're going first, huh?
I don't know.
Oh.
I have done my biological testament. We have it now here in Italy only for a month or so, that you can decide that you don't want to be in the hospital and kept in life when it's no hope. And I really dreaded to die in hospital. I don't want, because I saw my ex-partner who died in hospital and how he was treated before. I went there to defend him against what was happening. And I want to die at home somehow, if it is possible.
That's a really good point that you raise, because what you're talking about there, other people might know as advanced directives or advanced decisions. So, or an advanced healthcare decision, depending on what country you're in, where you can state what kind of treatment you do not wish to have towards the end of your life. And if you don't have one of those, then the medical profession almost definitely will give you life-prolonging treatment no matter what state you're in, because that's what they're trained to do. So if, for example, you know that you want to die at home, the statistics that I looked up for the UK, 63% of people say they want to die at home, but actually only 21% do. That's a huge gap. But we can help to ensure that that will happen, that you can die at home if that's what you want, by taking care of this kind of documentation. Now, to complete an advanced directive, which has questions like, would you want to be kept alive if you were in a coma? Or at least these are the questions that I ask people on the courses, and we discuss. And you can't answer these kinds of questions without knowing what your life values are. So we explore all that as well. But questions like, would you want to be resuscitated if you suddenly had a heart attack? Or if you had a terminal illness, would you want to be resuscitated? Would you want to be given antibiotics if you had some kind of infection? You know, these are difficult questions to answer. In the first place, you have to face up to the fact that you're going to die. And in the second place, you have to imagine things that you'd really rather not imagine. But if you can do it, and it's easier with the support of a group, and my support obviously as well, then you are giving yourself the maximum possible chance of having what could be called a good end of life.
Yeah, and I have an additional question, because the Buddhist teachings say that you are not dead when the Western medicine says you are dead. And that means if you agree on giving your organs for another person, that means that they are taken out while you are practically alive. And they say, unless you are really a bodhisattva, a person who is really, really in the whole heart convinced that they want to give over their body to somebody else, and not only in the head, but in the whole heart, you will find that as an attack, because you will never be able to defend yourself in this state, but you will still be aware. We know it also from near-death experiences, that the awareness and the consciousness is still there, although the body is somewhere else. So that made me think a lot about, do I give a permission or not? And I didn't do it, because for me, death is a sacred moment, and it doesn't have to be violently interrupted with, like, it's like a burglary, you know, there's still something out of you. Yes, you can save somebody else's life, but are you ready for that? So I'm wondering what you think about that.
It's very interesting, and I didn't know that before. So there's something that I've learned already, which is brilliant, because I'm always learning more about this subject. Well, but this is the kind of thing that comes up in the groups, you see, and that's why it's useful to have a group, because lots of people have all sorts of different experiences, and we get to discuss it. And what's very important is that each person can make up their own mind about what is important for them, because there's no right or wrong way. Somebody who has beliefs like that, it will be really important to acknowledge those and honor them. Somebody else who doesn't have those beliefs might have a completely different perspective, or even someone who has the same beliefs but makes a decision for other reasons. It doesn't really matter what the decision that is made, so long as there is a decision made and it is communicated to other people so that they can support you in getting whatever treatment or whatever end of life it is that you have actually said that you want.
Yeah, and especially to have, sorry, I always talk today, especially that you have thought it through and felt it through.
Exactly.
And not just made a cross in a box, you know?
Exactly. And that's another reason. You can't do this kind of thing without having thought it through and felt it through. And that's another reason why people don't do it.
And when I'm feeling in my best moods, I want to look forward to my death with curiosity and interest, and really wonder what this experience is like. And then I say, yeah, but I don't want to hurt. I don't want pain. You know, there's conditions on this. I'd love to fully experience death. I really would. I don't know if I'm going to be up to it. I don't know that.
We don't know.
No, we don't know. And again, we come back to that uncertainty and the not knowing. And then so that means that part of life is becoming at ease with unknowingness and uncertainty. And, you know, something else that Philip said to me in the last few days, he was he was a very intelligent man. He knew a lot of information. He loved knowing about things and learning things. And it was difficult for him to be in a place of not knowing. But in the last few days, he said to me that he thought that he was now at peace with not knowing what was going to happen. And that was a great gift for me as well, to know that he had found some way of just being okay with it. not always easy, because, we as human beings, we like to plan, we like to know what's going to happen, or we like to at least fool ourselves into believing that we know what's going to happen. And that, there's nothing wrong with that, so long as we can take it lightly. We don't get very attached to the plans. If we get attached to the plans, that's when trouble happens.
Yeah, when we pretend it has to be as we want it.
Exactly.
I want to bring up a comment from Gina. She says one of the challenges of dying at home is that people don't know how to prepare for it, and there is a tendency to want to remove the body quickly. Yeah, and I wanted also to say, if you have somebody around, if you don't have children or relatives or who volunteers who are around you, then it might be a little bit difficult, because the sort of care you need, you cannot just lie there and,
okay. So this is another element that we look at in the course, because what people don't realize is that you don't need to immediately ring up a funeral director or even a doctor when somebody has died, but we think that we do because we don't know what to do. So we discuss what happens if you want to keep a body at home, what you have to do, how to look after it so that it's possible, to understand what are the laws, and there's hardly any law about this. It's just that we have learned over the years that to hand all this in after death, immediately after death situation over to professionals. And it doesn't have to be like that. But unless you're willing to face up to the fact that death is going to happen, you're never going to learn that. So I didn't know about all this stuff after Philip had died. So I did what you do, which was ring a funeral director, and they took care of it all. If I'd known this beforehand, and we had been able to discuss it, I think he would have had a very different end of life. I'll never know, of course, but I'm now, as I said, on a mission to educate people and to have them make their own choices. It's not that one choice is better than another, but making a conscious choice is important.
Yeah, and that seems to be, and these people who came back from near-death experiences say it too, although they were not really, or maybe they were dead, I don't know. But in some belief systems, they say that the soul takes time to separate from the body. And if the body is carried away and the soul is, let's say, still here, and where does it go? So you can think it is stupid, but I don't think so, because we are energy beings.
Yes.
And the energy is not just away, that is somewhere.
That's very interesting, because I also had read that. And so I was prepared to have, to sense Philip's being around. But I was a bit shocked when that was not happening. As far as I could feel or sense, he went off like a shot. Now, I'm not surprised if that's what happened, because by this time he was really ready to go. But I was still shocked, because I had expected it to be different. And what I've now learned, rather humbly, I have to say, because I discovered in the process of grieving that I had all sorts of ideas about how grief should be, what should happen to a body after it dies, what does happen to a body after the body has died, is the soul still there, etc., etc. I had all sorts of things that I thought were right, and that I had to open my heart to and discover that actually there's a whole range of experiences, and they're all acceptable and they're all okay. And that's where the lack of judgment is important. It's so important that we just allow for all of it and don't try to make it be one way or another.
Yeah, I heard from hospice people that there is no one dying in the same way as somebody else. That's everybody has their own individual death. And we can learn a little bit by observing other people's deaths. So the probability that some things might be similar, but at the end, the decision, and when you say your husband wanted to go and that he's gone immediately, it makes sense, and somebody else maybe linger ring around and doesn't want to go. It depends also on the circumstances, you know.
Yeah, or even actively wants to have the experience of being of this world, in this world, but not of it in the same way. So we just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there is room for all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that there weren't very many rules about what you absolutely had to do once someone died.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about Italy here, and I have no idea how restrictive they are. I mean, cremation is extremely rare, for
No,
example.
you can do it.
You can do it. It's
But you
not
cannot
illegal.
have the ashes in your house or something.
Yeah,
like
you
in
can't.
America, it's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So I don't know
Yeah.
so much about other countries, but I do know that different countries have different regulations.
Mhm.
In the UK, you have to take care of the disposal of a body. That has to be taken care of in a particular way. So, for example, you can't just you probably wouldn't want to do this, but you can't just take a dead body in a car somewhere or put it on a bus to transport it somewhere. You can't do that. But you can bury it anywhere you like. There are restrictions. There are some restrictions,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to be in a cemetery. You don't have to get a funeral director. You can do it all yourself if you want. You do have to get a desk,
Excellent.
for example. So different countries will have different rules about this, and so it's really important to double check. And I have a new book coming out in August called Before I Go, The Essential Guide to Creating a Good End of Life Plan. And I've written that book so that it's available for everybody in whatever country. But I keep saying you need to check this in your country, because even in a local area, it can sometimes be different. So I'd really be encouraging you to check what is important for you in your area of Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really, I would like to
we
be
need
buried
help.
in my ground, yeah.
That would be
And
great.
I know we have buried a lot of cats and dogs, and that was not really legal.
Right, okay, so...
It wasn't? Oh. Mm-hmm.
So these are the sorts of things that you have to find out beforehand, because if you don't find them out beforehand, then it's not going to happen. It's like what will happen is the status quo that most people are most comfortable with. And, people will say, well, I don't care because I'll be dead. That's true. You probably won't care, but the people left behind will care. And I can tell you from personal experience and from the stories that I've heard that when you are carrying out somebody's wishes, which have been written down and communicated, there is an enormous amount of comfort in doing that. It really, really helps. So that's another reason for looking this subject in the eye and welcoming it into your life right now.
Yeah, because otherwise you would always think, what would he do? What would he want me to do? And this insecurity. But if you know you are just... how do you say, enacting the will, it's much easier.
It's much easier, and also it means that there's much less room for arguments amongst family members, and that can happen only too easily. Even if you think that you are a family that gets on really well, I know, because I've heard the stories, that actually it can happen. Well, for example, with a friend of mine whose brother died suddenly of anaphylactic shock after being stung by a wasp. And what happened was that the children couldn't agree on where to have the funeral, where I think they were having an end of life celebration. They couldn't agree on the location for that. I mean, you don't need that at that kind of time. You really don't. And that's so easily been taken care of in advance.
Yeah, that's useless trouble, no?
Yeah.
So we can only hope that ourselves we are inspired to finally sit down and do all the steps, not only a few, and that the people who are watching will take it at heart and get familiar with these topics and don't fear them.
Yeah,
I think the more you talk about it, the more normal it becomes.
Exactly. And that's why I am facilitating conversations in all sorts of different ways that I can. And also to help people, because it's really easy to think, oh, it's just a will and it's just a funeral. But actually, there's quite a lot more things. So on my website, I've got a little quiz that you can do called How Prepared Are You? It's just 10 questions. It takes probably under a minute to do.
I must confess, I didn't do it. I didn't want to.
You might be surprised, Heidi. You might be surprised. You'll get whatever results that you get, you'll be given information about the next step that you can take to make it easier.
I will, but I didn't want to come into the broadcast and think, oh, I'm not really how do you say, adapt to talk about it. Wanted to stay in the illusion.
Well, it's a way of finding out how prepared you are and some of the questions you probably haven't thought about, and that's good, because once you're aware of them, then you can answer them. So
So for the last 5 minutes we have, I encourage people still to write some comment. Very few have shown up, also I know that they are watching.
Oh, so yes, they are.
Last 5 minutes to take the chance to ask something to
That's
Jane.
Another of your favorite topics, invisibility.
Invisibility,
yes, right.
Because there are so many people who don't write comments, who don't like your things, who don't, also they like it, but they don't subscribe and they don't make comments. And it's a shame, because you could really help the people who are doing the work just by, for instance, subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the websites and of Jane, of ours, of whoever you like to who you like to be with. No, how do you say, who you appreciate? Because you don't know how it is chosen with Google and all these things. They need this participation. The comments are very important, though, so that the pages can be found. The likes, the subscriptions are important. So you can help people like us and other people who are promoting topics you are interested in by just liking and writing a little comment.
And that helps to share on this particular interview. It helps to share the message about dying and death and grief, and having us more at ease with those topics, so that we can talk around them around the dinner table, or we can lessen the hassle that can happen after somebody dies.
Wonderful. We are at the end. I don't let me see. Let me check if I find somebody else showing up. Takes a little bit of
So okay, so then I just remembered I wanted to say something. One sentence which somebody else said to me, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to use this. So I'm using this with their permission. It's just a good end of life plan is a great going away present.
All right. Wow. That's good.
That's a good quote.
Yeah. So that's another gift. I'm giving a gift to you in that form, and you can give a gift to your family or your friends or your community, whoever it is. And actually, you just finally, I remember you mentioned about if you don't have any family. If you don't have any family, creating some form of community is even more important. And we talk about that in the courses as well, because actually I work with lots of people who don't have family and they don't know what to do. And it is an issue. You do have to think it beforehand in that case. You really do.
Very important. Oh, I hear echo again. So, but we are at the end, and the technology has taken us through the hour. Also, some things didn't work again, but we will upgrade very soon to some other possibility of live streaming. I'm doing all my technical apprehensions aside, and
your friend's closing remark will be indelibly written in the timestamps that will come out this weekend when I get around to them.
So people can then, when they come back to the video and they come back to the website of your event page, they can then find what minute was talked what about. And so they can go back and forth on the video, and that's more easy if there was some special thing they were interested in and just want to read.
Yeah, like looking for my quotes, for example. Yeah.
Very good. I like it.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
at this point, it's only to thank you for all the quite numerous, how do you say?
Numerous.
Numerous people who have watched and the few who have commented.
Contribute.
Thank you very much. And
This is
we
great.
hope you will show up for the rest of our series too. And get connected. Get connected with Jane. And
Yes.
excuse my English, it's sometimes a little bit.
That's fine. It's brilliant. So much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yours is pretty good too. A little strange sometimes, but pretty good.
Oh dear.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.